What's going on tonight, Mythology fam? Tonight we're going to be learning about the ancient Aztec deity Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl means feathered serpent in the native Aztec language Nahuatl. This language was pretty much uniform across Mesoamerica and even through hundreds of different city-states. This was a common language and is still even spoken today in Mexico by over 1 million people. So this guy takes shape in a lot of different ways, but we'll start from the earliest point where he was seen in the beginnings as a vegetation god. This guy was regarded as a god of the wind, a patron of priests, an inventor of calendars and books. He was also seen as a symbol for death and resurrection at times. Quetzalcoatl was also seen as a trickster figure, not like a extremely devious one like we read in Loki last week, but a trickster figure for, a good cause. He brought maize to Mesoamerica in a myth by turning himself into a black ant and, crawling his way over with the other black ants to retrieve a little kernel of corn to bring back and plant where they lived. Through my research, I've found that there are multiple ways that Quetzalcoatl was born. I think one of them was that he was the third son of the dual creator god Omitotl. He had two older brothers, Totec and Tezcatlipoca. Tezcatlipoca was basically his rival, akin to like Thor and Loki. They had a lot of rivalry between each other. Tezcatlipoca was kind of like the more sinister of the two. Was also seen as a jaguar, and they would basically kind of just pit themselves against each other. It was a very recurring theme in Aztec mythology. Others say that Quetzalcoatl was born through parthenogenesis. Mixcoatl, god of the hunt, impregnated the goddess Chimalma by shooting an arrow from his bow, and she caught the bows with her hand, giving her the name Shield Hand, which is what Chimalma means. They ended up marrying somehow after that. I don't know why, but she was unable to conceive, so she looked for help at an altar and was told by a priest to swallow a jade or an emerald stone, depending on the story that you read. And she swallows it and becomes pregnant. And although he was portrayed as a feathered serpent, he was portrayed as a man around 1200 CE, wearing a conical hat and having a more human-like appearance. Now this is interesting because there's also belief of a real-life Quetzalcoatl. Tepiltzin Quetzalcoatl, also known as One Reed, was famous for his rule of the capital city of Tula, where it became incredibly prosperous under his rule. So boom, things were going pretty good, and then his rival brother, Tepiltzin, he invites him out, tries to get him drunk, gets him so drunk that Quetzalcoatl ends up sleeping with his sister, and out of embarrassment exiles himself from the capital city of Tuca, heading east to the Gulf. So this is where the history gets interesting. When Hernando Cortez invades in 1519, there's a good group of people that believe that this guy is the second coming of Quetzalcoatl. He's coming from the east. He's got shiny armor. He looks different than everybody. He's got, all this crazy technology. I mean, what are ships? Like, they don't know anything about ships like this. They're humongous ships. Now, this is a legend that possibly has been turned into history by Spanish historians, just writing legend into history just by misinterpretation, but it is something that has been widely regarded and spectacled over. Now, Aztec culture flourished in the highlands of central Mexico between 12th and 16th century. They adopted many traits and institutions from their predecessors, such as Mayan and Teotihuacan. They were innovators in economics and politics. Their civilization died in 1519 by Hernando Cortez in a little thing called smallpox. Their native language was Nahuatl. And they had a lot of different groups in Mesoamerica. You had the Mexica, Tepanex, Chalca, Xochimilca, Tahuica, and Tlaxcalteca. And the crazy thing about it all is that they all spoke the same language, Nahuatl, and shared common central Mexican Aztec culture expressed in religious, economic, social, and political institutions and practices. In the late Aztec period from 1350 to 1520, there was a population explosion from 500,000 to 3 million people. Crazy buildings and settlements, agricultural practices. They started to grow in competition, started, getting into war with each other. There was the War of 1428, where the Tenochtitlan overthrew the Azcapotzalco and joined with the Texcoco and the Tlacopan to form the Triple Alliance, or the Aztec Empire. They had two social classes, nobility and commoners. From what I was reading, this feels like it's pretty much kind of like a feudal, medieval times situation going on over here. You got the nobility, the hereditary group. You can only be born into it, occupied with the most important political positions, and they controlled most of the economic resources. You had kings. There was the highest level of nobility. Tecuhliti were high-ranking chiefs with important political and military roles. You had nobles, called pili, lower-ranking nobles. They would pay tribute to kings. Think of it as like serfdom. You got people all living on a giant plot of land. Everybody's kind of contributing, feeding all the way to the top. Now, they also had slaves as well, and in terms of social mobility, it was kind of tough. If you were a commoner, you just couldn't be nobility. You had to be born into it, but you were able to get a little bit of social mobility if you were, doing good in war, or if you were a merchant or a priest. Aztec economics were highly agricultural. They were really good farmers, and basically had to industrialize it early to, make for the population increase that they received over the last 300 to 500 years of their empire. Their staple crops included maize, beans, amaranth, squash, and there was a high artisan prominence, producing a variety of utilitarian and luxury goods. Women produced cotton textiles, which were seen as money, cookware, ritual objects. There was a big citywide marketplace, open every single day, and at its peak had probably 60,000 daily participants. And although they were firm believers of buying and selling goods, land and labor were not commodities to be bought or sold. The Aztec Empire conquered over 500 city-states in northern and central Mesoamerica and forced their subjects to pay tribute in textiles, foods, and many other goods. And this was referred to as a policy of indirect rule, which meant as long as the kings that were conquered by the Aztec Empire recognized the superiority of them, they were left in power. Which is honestly pretty nice, to be able to still hold your kingdom, as long as you're paying extortionate money. The Aztecs were polytheistic, but the deities did not exist as discrete, easily identifiable individuals. They were hard to identify visually because many separate deities shared similar attributes and were closely related transformations of one another. The most prominent ones were Tezcatlipoca, Quetzalcoatl, Tlaloc, and Huitzilopochtli. There were many rituals served in form of the gods. Priests would bloodlet, stab themselves, and let their blood splatter on a paper and burn it to the gods. People that the Aztecs conquered would be sacrificed, usually getting their heart split open on top of a pyramid. It's pretty metal. Not only were they getting their heart split open, they'd get their body tossed down the pyramid. It was pretty crazy. Usually they were enemy combatants, and I think the coolest thing about it all is that before they're sacrificed, they're paraded around as a god for a few weeks. They're dressed in the god's clothing. People actually truly see them as real gods, even though this dude's, probably like about to poop his pants because he's terrified of getting his heart ripped out. There were 20 monthly ceremonies, usually days long, for these sacrifices. People also held religious and mythical items at home. There was like clay figurines, altars, incense burners. So you had a group of highly religious people, worshiping these gods. The Aztecs accounted for their historical events, religious events, and stories like that in a codex. And this was basically a religious almanac that, just helped kind of document, keep history. And even through getting conquered by Hernando Cortez and the Spaniards, they still were documenting in codexes from up, I think, until the 17th century. I think what this myth tells me about the culture that produced it is that the Aztecs were really firm believers in their agriculture. Quetzalcoatl was a god of the wind, a god of the rain, god of corn. I think just those three things combined are just quintessential for, being able to grow and have food. The Aztecs were very grateful for their ability to farm at such a good rate, and I think, exemplified their praise for their gods by characterizing them with these traits. Quetzalcoatl closely reminds me of Thor and Loki in its own way, just that he has his own sibling rivalry, and he is the trickster, although he uses his trickster character for a greater good. He looks to help the people rather than, hurt anybody. He's not getting jealous, trying to shoot anybody with arrows. He's a pretty cool guy.